Minus 12.
All right, there we go. Cool. Took me longer than usual, but we got it. All right.
Go ahead.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to a very informal evening with the friends of the Henry O. Tanner House. Tonight is really just all about speaking to the artistic legacy of Henry O. Tanner, what Henry Ossawa Tanner represents in terms of the legacy of Black artists within our community, and what the symbolism of the arts means for what's possible in North Philadelphia and Strawberry Mansion, in Philadelphia proper, speaking to new generations of Black artists. And we are so excited to just explore this topic with you tonight. Shout out to Barrett. Thanks for joining us. And I'm gonna go ahead. We're also live streaming on Facebook. If you go to the Friends of the Henry O. Tanner House, you can, share the conversation, make sure more people see it. Please do so. But we're gonna start with an amazing video, which was produced for the campaign, led by Danielle Deloach of Freckle and Tea Productions. It is a beautiful video. We have it on our page. We have it on other pages as well. I'm gonna go ahead and play it, and then we're gonna come back and begin to kick things off. I'm gonna do a little bit of a bio, and we are really excited for multiple people to be involved in our talks. Chris, we'll do introductions right after this video. This is the work of Henry Ossawa Tanner. The Smithsonian declared him the most distinguished African-American artist of the 19th century. Henry Ossawa Tanner was also the first artist of his race to achieve international acclaim. What most people don't know is that he committed himself to painting as a young boy while living in the Tanner family home at 2908 West Diamond Street in the heart of North Philadelphia. This home, a National Historic Landmark, is now in disrepair and requires our immediate support to be saved.
Preservation contributes to a forgetful society. It empowers us by revealing historical themes besides slavery, including entrepreneurship, civil rights, entertainment, sports, education, and political activism. The Henry O. Tanner House represents someone that achieved international acclaim as an artist in spite of his blackness. So let's preserve his legacy with this house.
We've established the Friends of the Henry Ossawa Tanner House on the shared importance of sustaining 2908 West Diamond Street, as it represents the preservation of significant Black Philadelphia legacies and globally applauded historic accomplishments. With the investment of the proper resources, we believe it can serve various community-centered possibilities for present and future generations of Philadelphia artists, intellectuals, change makers, tourists, and visitors. Philadelphia's Historic Commission and L&I have both agreed that this property, although currently deteriorating, can be salvaged. Long-term water damage has severely impacted the property. In direct dialogue with experts, we identified priorities. The immediate focus will be revitalizing the foundation, then followed closely by rehabbing the exterior wall, which is bowed, and then the complete replacement of the roof to ensure the structural integrity of the Henry Ossawa Tanner House. Once these urgent needs of stabilization have been addressed, we identified a subset of the budget to attend to restoring the interior of the home. Our goal is to fundraise from the end of Black History Month to Henry Ossawa Tanner's 163rd birthday on June 21st, 2022. All funds raised will be used in service of repairing the property.
One house, many histories. We must save our historic assets.
Man. Once again, thank you to Danielle Deloach of Freckle and Tea Productions for putting together that video. Other voices you heard, other than myself, Chris Rogers, you also heard the voice of Deborah Gary, who runs the Society to Preserve Philadelphia's African American Assets, SPA. And you also heard the voice of Judith Robinson, who's also part of the team of the Friends of the Tanner House and a longtime community advocate and real estate broker in Strawberry Mansion. So thank you everyone who helped put that together. And let's continue to support, uplift, and share the campaign. Thanks for everyone who's been sharing the Facebook video so far. Let's do a round of introductions. We got some more folks to join us as well, so this is great. So I'll start. I'm Chris Rogers. I take he, him pronouns, and I currently serve as the program director, volunteer program director at the Paul Robeson House Museum, and was invited to sort of take part in this new campaign to save the Tanner House. And there's certainly a relationship between the Robesons and the Tanners, cousins through marriage. But more importantly, it's about these how these homes and the communities that sustain them help us steward, community arts and cultural, programming all throughout our communities, and that's what brings me here. So we do have a couple featured guests with us this afternoon. I'm so excited to introduce, allow space for you to introduce yourselves. As I mentioned before, very informal conversation today, and hope to be here till about 7 o'clock. And I'll begin by passing the mic over to Rod Jones. Would you introduce yourself? Tell us a little about who you are, and why are you excited to take part in today's activity?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for the introduction, Chris. I'm Rod Jones, he, him pronouns. I am an artist, maker, person that lives and makes things. But I'm an artist that works with the Doc's Thrash House, which is it's a house in similar vein to the Tanner House. And Doc's Thrash was a printmaker that lived in Philadelphia around like the early 20th century, and did a lot of prints with the arts community in the Northeast region. It was kind of like internationally known as well. But what we try to do, the Doc's Thrash House is the same. It's the same thing that the Tanner House is kind of doing, just kind of making space for artists today, trying to like build on the legacy of the Doc's Thrash House. And also just make space, like I said, make space for younger artists to pursue their own kind of like careers. But yeah, I was invited to this conversation by Maya, who works with the Doc's Thrash House. It's nice meeting Chris today. And I think that Henry O. Tanner, his legacy is similar to something that I look to doing in my own kind of like studio practice and my own practice as an artist, that is kind of like uplift the everyday life, Black people from the everyday, make work every day, because I don't know, we here existing too, and that our voices and our stories are just as important. So I think this is an important conversation that I didn't have like growing up. So I'm excited to be a part of it, to be a part of it today.
Thank you so much, Rod, for joining us and making space on I know this sacred day for many, and just overall grateful. Next, I want to come to a friend of the Tanner House, someone who helped really serve as the inspiration for tonight's conversation, and that's Mary Enoch Elizabeth Baxter. Would you like to try your audio now? See if it's
Sure. I don't know what's going on. My internet connection is acting a little funky. Can you hear me? Am I coming across?
Yeah, I can hear you. Your video is kind of coming in, but we can hear you clearly.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm also a local artist in Philadelphia, who is definitely a supporter of this mission and reintroducing the legacy of Henry Ossawa Tanner to Philadelphians and, other folks nationally, worldwide. My practice is based on my lived experiences. mostly with systems of oppression, and all the ways that they intersect with criminal justice reform, gender oppression, gender justice, reproductive justice, racial justice, economic justice, um, and mostly things that affect marginalized groups like Black people, you know, whether it's local, nationally, globally. And usually my work is attached to campaigns that influence policy. Um, and, for me, making sure and ensuring that, Black Philadelphians, have a cultural space to express themselves, and to connect and be in community is extremely important, not only to our individual, practices, but also the collective, and how we interact with each other, support each other. So I'm just happy to be here tonight and just be in community with you all and, share a little bit more as the night goes on.
Greatly appreciate that. Greatly appreciate you making space on this Sunday for this conversation. Now we do have a couple other folks on the Zoom, and I want to just hold space because we want to make this a collaborative conversation. So I want to hold space. Is anyone else on the Zoom? Would you want a chance to introduce yourself? Would you like to take part in the conversation with us today? Feel free to just unmute yourself and say what's up for a second. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. With that being said, tonight is truly about just speaking to the influence and impact of Henry Ossawa Tanner, and him representing that. If he's sort of, and by the Smithsonian and this sort of like way of representing the first African American artist who really who created an international acclaim through sort of more formal institutions, art institutions. We want to talk about what that means and what that legacy means for the artists that come behind him, and how this home, or the potential for this home in the community, right, to really generate and support more artists, and the potential that art has, as Mary spoke about, that it's not just art in itself. It's not just an appreciate art for art's sake, but rather art as a tool in social change, while also being a tool of beauty in our communities. So I'll say, I'll open up with this first, question, and Rod, Mary, feel free to jump in how you would like. It's like, when did you first come in to know who Henry Ossawa Tanner was, or how did you find out about who he was, or who he is, or what his art is about?
Honestly, for me, it was through this campaign. I had never, heard of him as an artist. I'm, a lifelong North Philadelphian. I grew up at 24th and Ridge, and yeah, I was just enamored, like, that this person, had this extensive track record, was known, pretty much outside of the city, because his work is in museums all around the world, but it seemed to be really no focus on him outside of this campaign in the city. This is a person that attended the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. He has a historical marker, which I later learned that's in North Philly outside of his home. He has work that is in the collection of Philadelphia Museum of Art, but virtually I hadn't heard or learned about him in school, whether it was, elementary, junior high, and even college. I am a graduate of community college's art and design program, and I virtually, never heard the name until the Friends of the Tanner House started, advocating and really just bringing this legacy back into the public memory.
I appreciate that, because it speaks to the need. I mean, there's so much about the ways that arts and arts programs in our schools have been devalued and sort of like instrumentalized to only serve one sort of way of thinking, and not we need more to talk about how local, students and youth come into understanding the artistic legacies that is right beside them, surrounded by them in the neighborhoods that they grow up in. So I really appreciate the way that you laid it out there, and that like we discover, we come into our own time of discovering these folks, and it gives us the opportunity to think about how we create those inroads for others. So Rod, what about you?
Yeah. I'm I hadn't heard of Henry O. Tanner until I was in grad school. So I also went to the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. That's where I got my graduate degree. But I didn't learn it through like the curriculum of the program that I was in. I learned it through a curator who was also working at the institution, Dr. Kelly Morgan. And she was doing research on Henry O. Tanner's practice and his kind of overt in Philadelphia. And what struck me about Henry's life and career was kind of something that Mary had already spoken to, this kind of like internationally renowned artists having placements in different museums and galleries, not only in the States, but throughout the world. I read up on, well, we know that he later, in his later life, he lived in Paris, but had this kind of like career that was renowned and was flourishing, and he was just as part of the conversation as any other artist that you could look at as like a great master or part of the canon in this kind of mode of painting that he was painting in, but got like denied being a part of shows, even shows that he had worked in Philadelphia. So growing up in the 19th century, we're familiar with like the climate of the country at that point. So literally being like, no, like your paintings are dope, but you can't come into this space. And I thought for me, it struck me. It struck me as a student at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, learning and being a part of that community. But for someone, 200 years earlier to be denied that community, it really struck me as a student at the time. And I think that it still does now, but I hadn't revisited him since being a student. But when I learned about the project, the Tanner House, that's what kind of got me reinvigorated about it again. And that has kind of like excited me, because the thing about Henry O. Tanner's life was like he left the States to find community, to build a practice, to build this kind of like resume that Mary spoke to, this like to kind of build himself up, to be a part, to be at the table, to just have a seat, right? But that was the thing that kind of like struck me. He had to leave to feel a part of the community. And I think that that's the case for a lot of artists. And I was thinking about this when I was writing my notes. I know a lot of Henry O. Tanners that just that gave up, that was like, man, I don't have the resources. I don't have the access. I don't have the time to invest in a practice. And it was just like, art is just not what it is. So yeah, I don't know. I feel yeah.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No.
Yeah. So that was interesting what you said about the fact that because of the racial climate in the country, and then also he had to deal with other Black people in the community that didn't really understand art and its impact. And in a lot of ways, because he went to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, felt that he didn't want to be a part of the Black community, or he was an elitist in some way. But one story that I read in the Washington Post was pretty interesting. While at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, there was an instance where students, white students, crucified him to his easel and threw him out in the middle of Broad Street. I don't know if you're aware. So that was one of the, one of many instances that really, propelled him to go outside of the country where there was a little bit more freedom. Which is interesting, that even today, I don't feel like he's celebrated really at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in a way that he should be, in comparison to other, folks that we would, I guess, consider some of his contemporaries, which like Thomas Eakins. everywhere you go in the city, this man has, Eakins Oval, which wraps around the Philadelphia Museum of Art, that's activated by children and families, which, we know that he was a known predator of children, and other women, and boys. And when you Google online Thomas Eakins Paffa, it was like an article like every year that the Inquirer did about some celebration, some tribute, which didn't, speak to the fullness of this person's story. But you have someone like Henry Ossawa Tanner, this Black male genius of a painter, person, intellectual, and he's relatively, unknown. There's no investment. There's no, celebration of his name, which I feel like just speaks to this historic, link with race, in the way that it's even playing out today, and who's like celebrated, venerated, and kept alive in public memory.
That is, I appreciate you for really, offering that, because I think it sets a context, like, as we sort of gear up for this, or as we're in the midst of this, very grassroots, Black-led, preservationist minded campaign for the Tanner House. The work of public memory in this moment has been a national conversation for like the past 3 to 4 years of who's installed in public memory and what resources are there to support them. As we think about the harms and the violence of someone like Thomas Eakins, and how that is in some ways sort of erased or withheld from the way that folks come into that story. It gives us the opportunity to think about how we celebrate folks like Henry Ossawa Tanner, someone who has a deep connection to the AME Church, and seeing the sort of community of free Negro organizing, and that his family comes out of in the city, the work of sustaining and supporting Underground Railroad work. There's a legacy of not only a commitment to excellence in the arts, but also a commitment to social engagement, a commitment to supporting the types of efforts and initiatives that need to be supported. And even as he goes and leaves for Paris, and lives in Paris, that does not leave him. There's a lot of correspondence that we found online of him checking in and asking, his niece, Sadie Tanner Moselle Alexander, they corresponded a lot about what was going on in Philadelphia, and seeing the legacy of Sadie Tanner Moselle Alexander and Raymond Pace Alexander and the fight for civil rights in Philadelphia. He's someone who's still within earshot of it all, and using his art in some ways to help support that, right? Saying, all right, this portrait we can sell off, and some of these funds can go to support this. So all those are here, and I see we got 2 new special guests with us.
And also with the art, I feel like he also used it as a tool to subvert like a lot of stereotypes in the way that Blacks were viewed by the outer public, but also how Blacks were viewing themselves, and those images matter. So I just wanted to just add that.
Yeah, I picked this up. So Miss Judith printed this out earlier today for our little informational breakfast at the Discovery Center, which was a great time. But this image itself, I think it's called The Annunciation. I have to look it up. But this image is like one of my favorite images of his. I want to give a shout out. We have Kier Johnston on from Amber Art and Design. Kier, you with us?
Yes, sir.
Hey, what's going on? How you doing today? Okay, it's coming on to video. Give him a second.
Feeling great, good brother. Thank you for having us today, and I really, I really appreciate the invite, all the efforts that you Black History, and honoring this real legacy figure of Philadelphia. Somebody who's been an influence of mine since I was a child, and definitely one of the real reasons of why I even considered that it was a possibility that I could become a professional artist.
I appreciate that. And this is Kier Johnson of Amber Design. I don't know if
you want me to just rap for a little bit?
Yeah, if you could tell us a little bit about Amber Art and Design, but then also I want to say in y'all catalog, there's also a mural that y'all worked on that featured Henry Ossawa Tanner. So tell us a little about Amber Art and Design, and maybe about a little bit of story of that mural.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, so just to reiterate, my name is Kier Johnston. I am one of the co-founders of Amber Art and Design. We're a collective of artists based in Philadelphia, really operating off of a collective model, operating in primarily BIPOC communities, and really kind of bridging that gap between institutions and communities, and raising conversations when they're needed, and using art as a tool to address a lot of issues that need addressing in a real cultural way. I was raised in Philadelphia, in part in Germantown, and growing up, my father always had prints, obviously not originals, but prints of Henry Ossawa Tanner's work in our living room, and one of which was The Thankful Poor. And he would always point to that as a young kid and tell me, he would ask me what I saw, and I'd go through everything in detail what I did see, and he'd say, what the most important part about that painting is, and I'd ask him what, and he would say the most important part is that was made by a Black man. And in telling me that the reality of becoming an artist of color was never a mythological thing. It was always something that was tangible. He in his historical position, gave me precedence to let me know that I could pursue this as a real thing, and of which I did. And so about 10 plus years ago, and really a track of about 5 years to make it happen, I pursued making a mural, because we do a lot of public art. I forgot to mention that. We're known for our murals around the city. Our collective did the John Coltrane, amongst many other historical figures across the city, but I pursued mural arts and the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts to make a mural for Henry Ossawa Tanner. And it was really my consistency that got it off the ground. When I brought the subject to some of the leadership of mural arts at the time, they thought it was a great idea, but simultaneously, and this was very much in line with what the Sister Mary Baxter was talking about, they were into the idea of doing the mural, but simultaneously did not know who Henry Ossawa Tanner was. So it was really on our onus to bring that project to light. We were able to utilize the momentum of the reality that his big show that was happening, that PAFA, was going on simultaneously. And yeah, thank you. Sorry, we're in transition to Providence, and so there's a lot of distractions going on. So I apologize for the background noise and static. But yeah, so simultaneously as we were getting that project off the ground, they were having his big exhibition at the Academy. And really, he was getting some of his just due locally and at the Academy that hadn't been done really since his time in Philadelphia. And I agree full-heartedly, like there's still miles and miles and miles of ground to go to where he gets his just due. He didn't get the support of people like Barnes while he was alive. Barnes actually publicly criticized him and did not collect any of his work. He was a frail and gentle man, and plagued by a lot of a lot of physical ailments during ridicule. And like a lot of artists that able to get any traction on the ground here in Philadelphia, he tried a couple of places around the United States and had to go overseas in order to really get the attention that he deserved. Now, his life and career wasn't entirely in a vacuum here in Philadelphia. He was able to get funded by the clothing store across from City Hall to do a tour around the Middle East so that he could see, because he was a biblical painter, he pursued that religious influence of his family into his personal practice and artwork. So he was able to get toured and funded through the Middle East and areas of biblical times so that he can get in its authenticity the landscapes that he was able to use and influences that he was able to use in a lot of his painters or his paintings. And although he took a very kind of academy and classical orientation and direction with a lot of the work that he did, he was extremely innovative. He used magnificent elements of light and color to define timings of day. And he was a very experimental in the approach that he took in his painting. So he wasn't just somebody that was looking in the past. He was very much a contemporary. He was very much a modernist, but he just also happened to be a realist in his style of art making. So he was always an extreme influence of mine. And again, I don't think I would be a professional artist without his influence, you know, and like a lot of the legacies of people of color here in the city that ideally we all live in and love so much, you know, they're not looking to take care of his legacy in the way that he should. I think the fact that the house is in jeopardy is an embarrassment. I used to live in Strawberry Mansion for 10 years. It's very similar to what's going on with the Coltrane House. I was part of the team and process that worked with the community to get the lights turned back on at the Hatfield House at Girard and 33rd. And, you know, another iconic landmark that was just going to go to waste. So it's very important that we take momentum into our own hands and do what we need to do to preserve our own stories, our own narratives, and our own legacies. And Henry Ossawa Tanner is very much at the center of a lot of that. If people on this call are not familiar, the mural is on North College Drive, right across the street from Girard College. It's walking distance from the school where he went to in elementary, and, you know, not too far from the house where he grew up at 29th and Diamond. So I encourage you guys to go and check that out because it's very much in a gentrifying area, and, you know, the mural itself might not be in existence too much longer because it's on an empty lot. And as we know, empty lots are getting bought up and built over as fast as we can imagine.
You know, thank you so much, Kier, for taking time. I just to note that, yeah, there was some, you know, little spaces where it cut out and cut back in, but overall, I think many of us got to hear just, you know, the inspiration that Henry Ossawa Tanner provided for you, the impact that, you know, the story that you and your father shared through Henry Ossawa Tanner's work. And you spoke about him being supported by the department store to go across to travel. He goes to Egypt, right? And one of the images that Ms. Judah Robinson, you know, had at the informational early is this image, which is interior of a mosque in Cairo. So as we were sort of speaking, you know, Henry Ossawa Tanner's work features a lot of religious themes. And, you know, certainly he comes through a Christian background, but certainly was also exploring and open to many other faiths. So this, you know, speaking to the interior of a mosque, you know, as we go through the season of Ramadan, we also had that image available for folks.
That's interesting. The store across from City Hall, are you talking about John Wanamaker's?
Yeah, he had a personal relationship with Wanamaker, and he funded him to go through the Middle East, Egypt, I believe Israel and Palestine.
Okay.
Israel didn't exist at the time, so it would have been Palestine.
Okay. Chris, have we reached out to Wanamaker's to see if they would want to support this campaign? because there is a historical connection here.
Yeah, that's a really strong point. We got to get on that. What is it now?
It's still the Wanamaker building, where it has like offices up top, but the bottom is Macy's. But I still believe it's owned by the Wanamaker family.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to, that's important as we sort of make these connections of there's always been like support for artists, right? And what that means for today. I think one of the things that Mary, I know we spoke about is that one of the things that the Tanner House could, symbolize, right, is also the importance of what it means to invest in and support young artists and Black artists and folks who may not, or have an institutional backing or not, but are seeking to express themselves and express themes that are important to themselves, to their communities, and how that, has the potential for like just, to speak to the desires of what we can make possible in our communities. And I would just love to hear you all talk about, I think about Henry Ossawa Tanner's work and the impact of the images, but as you all think about your role in the art, like what's the importance of, like connecting art to like social impact, and what does that mean for you and your work? And I'll just like leave it open there, and just like see where we can go as we think about what could be the potential for the Tanner House in terms of what it means for the upcoming generations.
Right. I mean, for me, personally in my practice, art has not only given me like the tools to reimagine my story. I had a film that recently won the Freeze Impact Prize, and I got an opportunity to have it on view at the Freeze Fair in LA in February. But, not only was it, powerful in terms of being cathartic and therapeutic and helping me process some of the experiences I had while living in North Philadelphia, and like, being a person that's impacted by so many systems, but it also gave me an opportunity to connect and be not only a voice, but also have others lend their voice to the project. And I was able to leverage that film to also be an organizing tool for the Dignity for Incarcerated Women Act, which is legislation that I and other women on the inside at Muncie and Riverside at the time. Now it's ASD and Mod 3 because they've moved the women into trailers on State Road, but also women in reentry to co-author legislation for Pennsylvania's Dignity for Incarcerated Women Act locally, but also being able to leverage and use it as, this organizing tool nationally to help get legislation passed in other states has been like not only transformative, but for myself, but for all those who are impacted, by women being incarcerated when they find themselves pregnant, and also like a slew of other incentives, like having free sanitary napkins and feminine hygiene products, because a lot of times we don't look at prisons as a place where they weren't originally designed for women and the needs of women, which are drastically different from men. So a lot of times women would have to choose because of the predatory charges of phone calls, being able to call home and check on their kids and take care of their feminine hygiene. So having women placed no more than 100 miles from the family, from their children and the caregivers of their families, having also now free phone calls to the caregivers, so that bond between mother and child isn't too, disrupted during incarceration. Because based on the statistics, children of incarcerated parents are 12 times themselves likely to go to prison. So just being able to use my personal experience to connect with like these larger systemic issues that affect women and ultimately our children, and then ultimately the community. It's just one way art can be used as a tool. And art, just to stress this point a little bit more, art has always been a tool to influence society at large. When you think about art and, early Christianity in Europe, a lot of the, monarchs, they would paint themselves as Jesus, Mary, and these religious figures to sway public that they have a divine right to rulership. So art has always been, a tool that's been used to influence, inform, and get people to behave a certain way. If we think about advertisements, like this is $1 billion industry where we're using art, we're using colors, we're using text, we're using imagery. So art has always been powerful, and maybe that's one reason why, art is the first thing to go in some of these communities that don't have a lot of resources.
Thank you. Very powerful, Mary. Rod?
Yeah. I second everything Mary just said. I think art has always been used to be socially engaged. I think also as a Black artist, it's hard to not be socially engaged and make art. I think that's a really difficult task. I think some artists manage to do it somehow within their own minds, but I think as a Black person navigating the world, I think we're always like socially conscious in our bodies, not necessarily in our minds, but in our bodies we're socially conscious, and I think that has a way of manifesting itself in the art. But within my own personal practice, to give y'all a background, I have a background in printmaking. And so printmaking at its core is socially engaged. The whole basis and root of printmaking is to spread information to the masses. So spreading images, spreading ideas, spreading beliefs, spreading propaganda. And this is something I talk a lot with my students in my printmaking classes is like, while you are kind of like individually making these prints, be thinking about distribution, be thinking about how people are looking at symbols and images. And so what I try to do within my own practice is to be in communities and have like printmaking workshops, hold events where we can come to a tent outside with no running water and shaving cream and a couple of screens and some squeegees and make prints and make t-shirts and make tote bags. This idea of like self-sustainability is something that's important to me. And I think it's also something that's important to the Black experience. I think historically Black folks have always been resourceful, have always had like self-sustainable practices, whether that's like making your own clothes or like soul food or coming up with your own games, coming up with your own language. There's these self-sustaining practices that I think are important and that I like to kind of invite others to kind of embark on with me. So within screen printing, some of the work that I do is have workshops where we print on totes or print t-shirts. And like I said, I work with the Doc's Thrash House. So some of the events that we hold are doing that work, showing folks that may not even be interested in the arts, may not even be interested in being creative, but may just have a passion about clothes, have a passion about speaking, have a passion about delivering messages, and showing them that they can do that with like the most rudimentary materials. And to Mary's point, that's like one way that art can be socially engaged. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of other ways, a lot of other models that I think are all just as powerful and relevant to doing that work.
I appreciate that, Rod. Thank you so much. Kier, was that you coming back in? You got something on this question?
Yeah, I'm here, brother.
I got you.
Yeah, I'll definitely add, the art to me is a God-given right of the human experience. And the realm of influence really can't be measured. When you look at, I don't know if many of you are aware, but when you look at how Tanner even became an artist, he was going down from his house that y'all are trying to save to the Schuylkill where Kelly Drive is, and was going there to go fishing with his family and saw somebody doing plein air painting and was overwhelmed with emotion because he had never really seen that experience before. And he wrote about that moment changing his life and realizing that he wanted to be an artist subsequently, you know. But when you look at what some of our earliest technologies are as a people, when you look at where language and communication originates from, it's all in that artistic expression.
Mhm.
You know, it's a way to communicate things that you can't really express in a verbal form always, or in a physical form. So art is in and of itself a spiritual thing, and it's something that is also systematically taken away from public school. When you look at the programs that are cut, when you look at when budget cuts happen, it's always physical, mental, spiritual expression that is immediately taken away, especially from people of color, because they know the potential and the power that is embodied when you have that ability. You know, most of the roots of American originality come from communities of color and come from communal innovation. And so, of course, when you look at the relationship between public schools and the incarcerated institutions, there's a reason why they plan for the number of beds that are going to be available in jails to the literacy rate in second graders. You know, that's a powerful transition in terms of the literacy rate that they use as a form of calculation to determine how many beds are going to be available in jails that are being built. You know, so that influence is power, and there's a reason why that is taken away from us. And you know, we continually use art as a mechanism of exchange. We've done projects all over the city that incorporate art with mental health, with people who are coming out of incarcerated states, and you know, recognizing that realm of influence is you know, kind of recognizing the depths of who we are, you know. And so to get that taken away, to get it diluted, to get funding cut, you know, we have to take it upon ourselves to really raise the bar. And you know, it takes a lot, you know, and there's a lot of sacrifice that happens. And that realm of power is a reason why I personally became a public artist, because I didn't believe in the institutionalization of art or expression. I believed in art being accessible to all people, one that is not an institution on top of the hill where you might not feel comfortable because the building was never made for you. And so we have to continue to take it upon ourselves to work together and to really, you know, share that realm of expression, knowing that people of color have some of the most sincere and the truest and most valued forms of that expression, even though it gets continually taken away from us. So, you know, we just got to keep on keeping on. But by doing so, we have to take a valiant effort to invest in the youth and the next generation. And, you know, that's something that we continually do and embody full-hearted.
I appreciate that. You know, I appreciate the way you know, synthesize that in terms of our actions. So before I get into like the business of, you know, everybody donate, here's where we are in the campaign. We want you to donate. I want to open up a space for anyone who's on our call today. If you have, you know, a question for our panelists today, how y'all feeling out there? Has anybody got any questions for us? If not, I'll run into where the campaign is, ways you can get involved, ways you can support. All right, doing my little teacher time wait. I'm giving y'all a second. And all right, so Friends of the Tanner House is we launched a crowdfunding campaign on IOBI. IOBI is a 501c3 organization that helps do crowdfunding projects that are specifically tied to neighborhood and public sort of like goals. So I'm gonna see if I can share the screen real quick so you can see where the campaign is. So we have the link in the chat. We certainly put the link in the Facebook as well. But this is the Save the Henry O. Tanner House campaign. You can watch the video again if you would like. You can see currently we're at about $17,000. We started this campaign by putting our dream down, right? Of well, how much funds would it take to really, transform and restore this house, right? And because it is a national historic landmark, there are certain, standards and restrictions that go along with that. So that has, with those estimates and having that inform the contractors and engineers that we've been working with, we come up with a rate of about, $300,000 that we believe can be transformational in terms of setting the right foundation for the Henry O. Tanner House to really thrive. So you can go to this page, read more about Henry O. Tanner. There's a lot of, hyperlinks as well, so you can get going. This book in particular, I think it was Kier who mentioned, Henry O. Tanner going to the park with his father, Benjamin Tucker Tanner, who also served as the pastor at Mother Bethel AME Church, and see someone painting. And he was like, I want to be a painter. So you see that visualized here. You can read more about the history. It's not just Henry Ossawa Tanner that comes up in that house. It's also his father, Benjamin Tucker Tanner, right, who's at Mother Bethel AME Church, and also runs the Christian Recorder, which is like, one of the leading papers in shaping Black Christian opinion during his time. And then his older sister, Dr. Haley Tanner Dillon Johnson, who was invited by Booker T. Washington himself to Alabama, where she becomes the first woman physician, not just Black woman physician, but the first woman physician in Alabama. So that generation, that's Tanner's older sister. And then right underneath, Tanner, Sadie Tanner Moselle, his niece, is also born in that house. Miss Judith has identified that Sadie Tanner, Moselle Alexander, and Raymond Pace Alexander are married at that house. Ray Alexander, mentor, a descendant of Sadie Alexander, mentioned that Carter G. Woodson, he sort of identified the home 2908 West Diamond Street during its time as the center of Black intellectual life in Philadelphia. So that, like, there is just a huge legacy of not only arts, right, but also of just like intellectuality and cultural work and spaces of faith, right, that all are part of this. So we asking people to contribute, to support, to let people know. We've been reaching out. We have some connections now with Mother Bethel AME, and now I'm bringing the campaign there to have a conversation. Trying to jumpstart conversations with PAFA, and think about their role and how they can support the work. Tyler School of Art and all our artists and cultural institutions in the city, we want to make sure that they're aware. And as we work, this is a project of Black preservation, and we know there's so much that is needed in that as well, of saving our Philadelphia African American assets. Shout out to Deborah Gary, who's on the call today. So please continue to donate. Look up the campaign. We're going to certainly post this in the chat. I'm going to pass it to our sort of like featured panelists, maybe to give like a final word for this evening, and and thinking about the potential of the Tanner House, the importance for supporting the Tanner House, and any other things you would like to share with us. If you got any events, opportunities coming up, I also like to know that as well. So I'll just open that up, and if anyone wants to hop in.
I guess I'll start. Or you got it, Kier, if you want to.
You go ahead, brother. You beat me to the punch.
Cool. Similar to kind of what Kier and Mary kind of spoke to in terms of the importance of the Tanner House. Like, is this campaign is important because on some level it is on us to kind of preserve these legacies, to kind of give life to what other folk won't give life to make space for what other folk won't make space for. So, if this connected with you, shoot that link to somebody that may care, and then they'll probably shoot the link to somebody that they know may care, and it just feels like that. I think that's like what's important here. This kind of making space to build community with each other. I've never spoken with Chris or Mary or Kier before, other than this panel discussion, and it was just like a really enriching experience. So I appreciate y'all for inviting me and allowing me to kind of partake in the conversation with y'all. That's all I gotta say.
Yes, thank you so much, Rod. We'll be at one of these printmaking sessions soon. I know you got some coming up. We'll keep an eye out for them. Here.
Yeah, I would just like to double up and say thank you again. Hearing what y'all have had to say has been very empowering and impactful. I'll reiterate that Tanner has had a long-lasting influence on my life, and whether young or old artists of color realize it or not, they would not be able to be doing what they're doing presently without his influence, and this is also a very unique historical moment that we're living in. The ability to leverage and kind of get a kickback off of white guilt in terms of financial movements, in terms of funding things, is at a turning point unlike anything we've ever seen. So, I think we got to come out and make public mandates on some of these institutions, like the Barnes, like the PMA, who housed some of his paintings, like PAFA. Like y'all as an institution got his work as part of your collection. You like to say that whenever it's convenient for you, but here's a moment where you can put your money where your mouth is, and this is important. The reality is you go to some of these events, like when Papa has their student show, when all the students are graduating, you get students who have never shown publicly, and because of the network that Papa embodies, these students are selling paintings for the first time for $10,000, $20,000, $30,000. And we have to put pressure on these institutions to have a cultural preservation for a building like that. And I also go around telling people all the time that places to actually commune, to congregate in the religious sense, like the Paul Robeson House, Chris, like potentially the Tanner House, like what we started at the Hatfield House, where the community now helps in running the space. The power and role and influence of the church is not at the point that it once was. So you don't really have these places as frequently where you could go and really meet and grow as a community together and meet your neighbors. That's how you start to dilute the violence that we're seeing all around the city. And we all realize what a plague that is to our city right now in terms of having Philadelphia actually grow to the potential that we know it all can be. And these developers are swooping in and putting their mark on everything and trying to take over everything with no disregard, with a disregard to the results and their impact. And it's, once again, it's embarrassing, so like we have to preserve these spaces, but by doing so, create a community together to where we push back and put pressure on these institutions that we know have the resources, and it would be nothing but one of their board members to write a quick check and help turn around a situation like this without even thinking about it. We live in Cobbs Creek, watching what they did out at the Cobbs Creek golf course, where they felled over 100 acres of trees, some of which were over 100 years old, and they were able to raise $65 million to try and preserve this old dusty golf course where Donald Trump used to golf when he was in college at Wharton and Penn. It's like, we don't need that anymore. It's like we have to be a sounding board to help really steer where some of these investments go, and it is a point where pushback and pressure is having real results in terms of the level of white guilt and other points of investment where we can get a return by letting people know what really matters. So I think we just have to continue to let people know what really matters.
Thank you so much, Kier, for that wonderful call to action and the context that you put it in. Yes, let's get organized, let's get these institutions in order. Mary, bring us home.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100% with everything that was said. You know, summer 2020, when we had the protests and the uprisings, and you know, all of these institutions and corporations put up statements, you know, confirming that systemic racism exists. And I feel like the Tanner home is, you know, an example of that. You know, the degradation that it's in, the, you know, total, you know, obscuring from public memory, all of that is a part of systemic racism. And, you know, the devaluing or just, you know, not valuing of the Black experience, Black excellence, Black life, is pretty evident. I'd also like to see, you know, city council, 40%, you know, of the land supposed to go to the people. I would like to see them, you know, step in and step up with some funds. Also, you know, Kira mentioned about the gun violence. They were giving out millions to these organizations that, you know, could provide alternatives for youth, to help, you know, sway from going, you know, in that direction and finding constructive and productive things to do. And I mean, what better than arts and culture? So some of those funds could be tapped and used, to create some curriculum and programming for our youth, so they can channel some of that trauma, because a lot of the killings in Philadelphia is revenge killings, because, you know, these children, they're grieving, they don't have places that they can go to and talk about and process. And, you know, they just act out in you know, violent ways, because there's no other alternative to help bring that in. So a place like the Tanner House could be, you know, a huge resource, for our youth in the city of Philadelphia. And yeah, whatever y'all got planned, call me up, whether it's, you know, actions on the ground or, you know, petitions or whatever. But yeah, you know, Philadelphia Museum of Art, there's some debts owed. Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, some debts owed. And you know, yeah. So just that's all I got.
I appreciate that, because I feel like the part that you mentioned, just in particular, thinking of you know, the intracommunal violence that we're seeing, is like, I think as we spoke about, like the Hatfield House, the Robeson House, the Tanner House, the idea of us building these anchors, right, which are held by people of the community for the community, right, and create those spaces where we can, one, like nurture each other and find spaces to gather and to really like build those critical connections, that really help, you know, sustain our relationships, and with that create a more a brighter tomorrow in our communities. And I'm really excited. I want to thank you all for making space this evening for this conversation. It has been wonderful. It certainly probably won't be the last time that we do like a online conversation. We do have some other events planned. We just had a wonderful gathering at the Discovery Center this morning. Be on the lookout for more conversations, more opportunities. We also have a big thing planned for the Hatfield House during Juneteenth weekend. But until then, we're going to continue to make these connections, talk to these institutions, build relationships amongst our community, and really get a lot of people involved in the dreaming, the collective dreaming of what the Tanner House, you know, can be. And think about the organization that is needed to help steward this house for the long term. We want you all to play a role within that. So I want to say thank you again. I want to say thank you to the Friends of the Tanner House for making this opportunity possible. Thanks for all the organizing. Thanks for responding to our emails. Thanks for lifting up. If you see this Facebook Live, share it with a couple people, let people know, send them the campaign link. And thank you again. I want to say everybody have a great evening.
Oh, I'm sorry. There's one last thing.
Go ahead.
Quick. You know, one of the, you know, whether it's PAFA or the Philadelphia Museum of Art, who owns one of Tanner's works, maybe they can auction it off and use those funds to reinvest in Tanner's home.
Talk about it. Talk about it, and I'll talk about making that all that publicly accessible too, right? In terms,
Right.
there's a lot that woo, yeah, we should certainly talk about that. And so let's continue to think about ways that we can leverage arts, leverage our work as in preservation work within our communities to really create a strong platform to see our Black communities thrive as they deserve to, and up against all the things that we're up against, and we're going to continue to fight and continue to overcome. So thank you all, and I'll be in touch soon. And from the Friends of the Tanner House, everybody have a good night.
Peace.
Peace.
Peace, y'all.
Yeah, have a good night. Have a good night.